Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast with host Britney Spears. Settle in and lock your doors as we crawl into the dark corners of true crime. In TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 108 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First, if you haven't yet, make sure you check out the website, thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about how TheKillFile got started. You can find a place to suggest a case you want me to cover, and you can submit a listener files form about your own true crime story. While you're there, you can also find the merch shop. In the merch shop, we have some KillFile true crime gear alongside some fun slogans on different shirts that feature the KillFile on the back. Some slogans are things that have been said on various episodes. Some of them are just some funny true crime themed shirts, and it also helps to support the podcast. If you haven't yet, I would say take a look. You may find something you love. Next, please take a second to rate, review, subscribe, or follow wherever you get your podcasts for the newest episodes every Monday. It's one of the best ways to support the podcast so others can find us and follow along. Thank you so very much for taking a moment to do that. The bonus content from TheKillFile called The Hidden Files are on a break for now, but they will be back one day. If you enjoyed last week's case, you can find more on Patreon, and I will keep you guys posted on when those will be back. Finally, make sure to follow us on social media. We are on Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. I will be doing a merch giveaway soon, and it will only be posted on the social media platforms on how to enter and win. So find a t-shirt that you love and that you might want, and look for the information. Thanks to all of my listeners who have helped support the podcast with sharing, telling friends, posting some of the podcast posts on your social media platforms, commenting. I love to see it, and keep sharing your thoughts with me on the cases. I want to talk about it all, and I read everything. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to be talking about a case that I'm actually not familiar with until I stumbled across it. A man named Anton Tony Charles Costa, aka the Cape Cod serial killer or Cape Cod Vampire. Let's jump in. Cape Cod is supposed to be a postcard come to life. Endless beaches, quiet fishing towns, salt air drifting through the weathered cottages. It's the kind of place families escape to in search of peace. But in the late 1960s, that peaceful paradise became a hunting ground for a predator. As young women began disappearing without a trace, fear would slowly start to replace the carefree spirit that defined the Cape Cod area. Rumors spread throughout the tight-knit communities, but no one had imagined the man responsible wasn't some stranger lurking in the shadows. He was charming, familiar, someone who blended effortlessly into the very community he would soon terrorize. In January of 1968, best friends Patricia Walsh and Marianne Wysocki planned to get out of their hometown of Providence, Rhode Island, and head to Cape Cod for the weekend. According to a book I used clips of for this case titled Helltown, The Untold Story of a Serial Killer on Cape Cod, written by Casey Sherman, the pair were planning to head up earlier on Friday and had asked a friend of theirs, Russell, if he could join them as the trio met for drinks earlier in the week. Patricia Walsh was a second-grade teacher at the time, said to be a 23-year-old beautiful young woman with brown hair and green eyes. She had planning on calling out sick on Friday so the women could leave earlier, which was pretty out of character for her. As Marianne was going to college at the time, she could also use the break. The two were really looking forward to their weekend getaway, having already booked a room at a local boarding house. Russell Norton, friend of the girls, said that he had just started a new job, so instead of being able to leave on Friday, he could use the bus to meet up with them on Saturday instead, and ride back with the girls that Sunday. The girls left early Friday morning in Pat's newer VW Beetle, said to be a light blue color, heading up to a house that they were staying at owned by a woman named Patricia Morton. As the landlady was showing the young ladies through the house and to the communal bathroom, they passed the room of another guest, stopping to say hello. Both Pat and Marianne waved to their fellow boarder, a man named Anton, or Tony, Costa. The girls would be sharing a bathroom with the man as the one upstairs was taken. Later that evening, the landlady made sure the girls were all right, heading to bed earlier as she passed Costa walking up to their room. Patricia Moulton headed to her own. Costa asked the girls where they were from and then offered to smoke some of his weed with them. Pat agreed while Marianne passed, saying that she would instead take a shower. As Pat and Costa smoked some hash, she noticed a book in his room about taxidermy. And when she pressed Costa if he was into that kind of stuff, He immediately lied and said it was actually left by the person who had rented the room before him. As Marianne came out of the shower, she told Pat they needed to get ready for dinner as she was starving. They bid the man farewell for the evening and headed to their room. On their way out, Costa told them to have fun, but to be careful in the town because in the off-season, as this was January, there was a lot of quote-unquote craziness. Little did the girls know that the craziest thing about the province area of Cape Cod was standing in the same room as them. As the girls headed out for a fun evening of drinks and food, they ran into another two ladies visiting the area and chatted with them about their home cities. They played music and they drank. Coincidentally, Costa had gone to a local friend's house to use some LSD, where he and his two lady friends went to the same club that Pat and Marianne were at. They didn't seem to notice Costa as he sat there drinking and tripping, so instead of making his presence known, he sat quietly watching, plotting, and fantasizing. Later in the night, the serial killer had left the girls a note on their door after they had gone to bed. Then he too turned in for the night. He was wakened the next morning by Pat and Marianne saying that they got his note about needing a ride and offered to take him to get his check from work so that he could pay the landlady and wouldn't be kicked out. As the girls took him to grab his check, they had mentioned their friend Russell would be arriving soon from their hometown, letting the killer know that if he wanted to act out his fantasies, he would have to hurry before that window closed. After receiving his last check and the girls still having about an hour to kill before they needed to meet their friend, they asked Costa if there were any nice local sights that they could see while they killed time. This was Costa's time to strike. The girls, having no idea, they had just laid out a plan for the killer to take them to an isolated place, as he asked them if they had seen the woods of Truro. He explained that there was an old cemetery out there from around the time of the Revolutionary War. Side note, I'm a moron, and of course I have heard of the Revolutionary War, but didn't exactly know when it was or what it was about, so I had to look it up. Forgive me. For anyone who also doesn't know, like I didn't, yeah, that's embarrassing, but whatever. It was fought from 1775 to 1783, when the 13 colonies fought for our independence from Great Britain. Great, moving on. Offering to take them to this extremely old cemetery, commenting on how it was allegedly haunted and creepy, the girls seemed pretty excited about the woods now. When the trio arrived to the area, they got out of the car, with Costa impressing his prospective victims with knowledge of the area, telling them about the history that took place there. As he snatched a bottle of wine from the back seat of Pat's car, they each took a drink with Costa, secretly placing his last tablet of LSD on his tongue. He then showed the girls various gravestones, told them about how old they each were, and read their engravements. Costa then said he had hidden some grass not far from where they were standing, saying it was actually on the way back towards their car, telling them that they could get stoned because they were all cold anyways. On the way back towards the car, Pat saw what was described in the book, which, by the way, just reading the passages that I could for this case, oh man, I was hooked. The book is so well written, and I absolutely want to read the entire thing. If you guys are interested in way more details about this case, I highly suggest that you read it. As they had been walking along, Pat spotted a tomb, asking if they could look inside as the door was cracked open. Costa led the two inside this tiny space as one of the girls commented on it being sort of creepy. They then continued walking towards the car. Costa led the way as one of the girls had noticed none of them were paying attention to what time it was, and now they needed to meet up with their friend. As Costa squatted down, pretending to grab some weed from his hidden stash, the girls didn't notice that what he was actually grabbing was a knife and a gun. As he put them inside of his coat, he stood up. The girls were none the wiser. As he approached Pat and Marianne, he immediately pulled out the gun and fired at Pat, hitting her in the back of the neck with a bullet as she fell down. Marianne was seemingly shocked and couldn't even muster the strength to scream. Instead, she tried to make a run for it as Costa shot towards her twice, but had missed. I can't imagine that fear and shock of watching your best friend be murdered right in front of you, knowing that you're next. Holy shit. As Marianne kept running, she turned back to look at the killer, and as Costa had ran closer, he took another shot. This time, it hit his victim in the face. Marianne was not dead yet as Costa approached the young woman, stood over her, pulled the trigger again, firing into the side of her head. After the two victims were clearly dead, Costa quickly undressed the bodies and proceeded to rape each of them in a disturbing act of necrophilia. Now it was on to the next part that he partook with his victims, the part that was similar to taxidermy, the part that he must have done out of pure pleasure. Costa took Pat and Marianne after disregarding the rest of their clothing, hanging both of his victims from a tree with a rope that he had hidden out with his weapons. Fair warning, the next part is graphic. In an act that can only be described as a frenzy, Costa started to stab Pat's body, focusing on her lower half, including her butt, feet, and her legs before taking the knife and shoving it into what he believed would be her heart area. The killer then took his knife and sliced his victim with a deer cut from sternum to pelvis, pulling back her abdomen on each side. Then, for whatever reason, he cut her liver a few times before going back to the victim's leg. Costa then proceeded to saw his victim's lifeless body in half in an effort to begin dismembering her, using the saw to cut through her spine, separating the top half of his victim from the bottom half and removing one of her legs. He then removed the other leg, leaving her arms where they were. He moved on to Marianne. The killer dismembered Marianne into 5 sections, removing her head, using the blade to cut deep across her hips, and then proceeded to cut out her genitals and anus. After dismembering his victims, to his own satisfaction, Costa would find a shovel and begin to find a place to bury his victims, along with the rest. Antone, Tony Charles Costa, was born on August 2nd, 1944, in a city not far from Boston, slightly north, called Somerville. Costa's father, Anton Fanesca Costa, was said to be killed in World War II while in the Navy when Costa was just an infant, and eventually his mother would remarry to a man named Joseph Bonaviri and have another son. Joseph would raise Costa most of his life. There had been signs from the time that Costa was young that something was off, as one person who knew Costa growing up would describe. When Costa was around 7 years old, he would tell his mom that he believed that he had seen a man looking similar to a picture that he had seen of his deceased biological father coming into his room at night. Costa was described by people who knew him as a smart individual, sort of a loner, and somewhat isolated, more odd, if you will. He was really into taxidermy and what went with that particular art. He would use any small animals he could find, like chipmunks, squirrels, or even pigeons, to practice with, and as he got older, he would describe to others how he would drive around at night, looking for critters or picking up roadkill to use. While Costa was still a kid and wasn't at the age to drive yet, neighbors started noticing that their household pets went missing, believed to have been snatched by the strange child, killed, and then stuffed. Although Costa's parents tried to keep their son on the straight and narrow path by employing him and giving him things to keep busy, it didn't seem to help the darker side of the person that he would become. When Costa was around 16 or 17, sources say that he would break into an apartment of a family who had a younger teenage girl on more than one occasion. The first time, the girl woke up to see someone strange standing over her bed, and when she proceeded to scream, it scared Costa off. Only a few days later, he would re-enter the apartment, but this time he would grab the sleeping girl out of her own bed and tied the poor thing up. Thankfully, before anything happened, the girl's parents came home to discover what was happening. When the authorities were called, Costa tried to give them a different story, insisting that it was some type of game the two liked to play. And of course, no one believed him. He was arrested and charged with breaking and entering, assault, and battery. Following this, he was sentenced to a year in juvenile detention. However, it wouldn't stick. Costa's mother pleaded with the judge to give her son a second chance, stating that he would do better if he could just start over somewhere else. It worked. The judge suspended Costa's sentence and placed him on a few years' probation. I couldn't help but wonder here, as much as we try for our children and we want to protect them, if it helps to keep them out of trouble or if they really need to go through it. I would have done the exact same thing, though. I mean, it's your child, right? Chances are they would only learn more crime if they're in juvie anyways. But in this case, I don't think that it would have changed this soon-to-be monster in any way. This is one of those cases where I think this guy was just born this way. But still, what is the right answer when it comes to your child committing a crime in their youth and the sentence to follow? Costa's mother sent him to live with some family, and eventually his mother would divorce her husband. Costa's younger brother then moved with his mother out to Cape Cod, where Costa was living with family, and they were reunited. Now, I read in a few sources that there was some sort of like Norman Bates type relationship between Costa and his mother. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you should watch Bates Motel. It's a fantastic show with amazing acting. But Norman Bates is like infatuated with his mother, where the lines are blurred between a family bond and a romantic interest. I guess Costa's internal struggle seemed to be similar. Some sources say that he was not only angry towards his mother for getting married after he idolized his father who died in the war, but for also having his younger brother, where now he had to compete for the affection of his mother with 2 other family members, but that he also found himself attracted to his mother. Some real Freudian shit, I guess. When Costa was a senior in high school, he met a younger girl who would eventually be his wife, a 13-year-old girl named Avis. Although there was a 4-year age gap, the two were inseparable and began a sexual relationship, Avis only being in 8th grade. When Avis was just a freshman in high school, she became pregnant with the first of the 3 children the young couple would have. Although Avis's mother was upset that her daughter was now pregnant and actually wanted to get Costa charged with statutory rape, it was 1963, so it would be easier for Avis to convince her mother that the right thing to do for the baby was to allow her daughter to marry the baby's father. Eventually, Costa would get into drugs to the point that he had acted strange and wasn't responsible enough for his marriage or the children, which hurt the marriage. The young couple would then separate, and this was around the time that Costa would hang around various women, and some of them would mysteriously disappear. Costa was known to grow his own marijuana in a remote area that would be easy to lure people out to see where others weren't around. During the month of June 1966, Costa was said to have picked up 2 young women hitchhikers named Bonnie Williams and Diane Federoff, offering the girls a ride to Pennsylvania because he himself was headed towards California. It was said the girls were never seen again. Costa later confided in his ex-wife that he actually left the girls in Pennsylvania because he didn't want to get into any trouble if he took them across state lines due to Bonnie being a minor at just 16 years old. However, this didn't make sense to me because Cape Cod is in Massachusetts, and he already took them to Pennsylvania, right? To others, Costa would admit that he had taken them all the way to a place called Hayward, California, not far from San Francisco. It's strongly believed that these 2 hitchhikers were possibly Costa's first murder victims. Costa, while out in California, started dating a young woman named Barbara Spalding. Barbara was headed back to Massachusetts with her new love interest, leaving her child with some family members while she was gone. She was sadly never seen again, and her body has been yet to be found. She is suspected to be the 3rd victim of Costa's. There are, though, I'm going to note here that there are some conflicting reports, though, as all of these people are listed as victims because they've never been located. I did see 1 or 2 sources saying that they may have been found alive later on, but these were alleged findings of the women, and I believe that they might have been misreported because according to the book, which, by the way, is extremely thorough and well-researched, the women's families never saw them again. This is, though, why they are on the list of women killed by Costa. Sidney Monson would be described by a former boyfriend named Bob on a YouTube video that I watched for this case made by Crime Close-Up. He would describe Sidney as a free, friendly, and outgoing young lady who was beautiful with long brown hair. Provincetown, or P-Town as it was known, was only said to be about 30 minutes from where she had grown up in a much different town, a place where she was desperate to break out of. Sidney was said to be an intellectual who loved to read and enjoy reading from different philosophers. That was something mentioned about Costa as well, often that he was also smart and piqued women's interest in his own way, as he too was philosophical, a little different, and could be charming. When Sidney ended up meeting Tony Costas, they began a friendship, which didn't seem out of the ordinary, but what I thought was odd was that Sidney called Costa Sire, like a nickname or something. It was strange, right? At the time the two met, while living in P-Town, Sidney and Costa were casual, platonic friends. On one occasion, as Sidney and Costa were said to have hung out, Sidney ran into her sister in the town, asking if she could talk to her. As her sister Linda had been running late for the day, she told her that they could chat later, but sadly, this would be the last time that Linda would lay eyes on her younger sister. She would last be seen getting into Costa's vehicle and wouldn't be heard from or seen again. When her sister had gone to where Sidney worked looking for her, she had noticed her bike out front. But Sidney was not there. Her coworkers would tell Linda that she had never showed up for her shift that evening. When Linda went to where Sydney lived and her roommate told her that her sister hadn't come home, this is when Linda got a ping of worry about her sister and where she could be. Eventually, Linda would find Costa asking where her sister was, saying that the last time she saw her was when Sydney was getting into his car. Of course, Costa would state that he had no idea where she could be. A few months after the disappearance of Sydney, Costa would meet yet another young lady named Susan Perry at just 17 years old. Almost right after the two met, they began to date and even shacked up for a bit before she too would vanish. So after Costa eventually gets caught, spoiler alert, he gets caught, he ends up writing this unpublished memoir of his confessions of what his versions of events and murders were. And in it, I guess he described how he killed his victims. Now, the Helltown book that I mentioned, the author, I guess, got access to the memoirs and events in the book. And the account of Susan's murder does come from that book, which, again, I am recommending you guys to read. It seems like a good one. According to the book, the murder took place in the two's apartment with a knife that Costa had kept. Allegedly, out of nowhere, Costa attacked his new girlfriend as they were tripping on acid, and Susan was in a vulnerable state. Stabbing the girl in the chest with his knife more than once, her life seemed to end in the blink of an eye. Costa then undressed himself and raped the dead body of his victim before he was said to have read through his book on taxidermy on what to do after the quote-unquote prey was dead. He used his knife to cut Susan's body from her sternum to her pelvis, as he later did with Pat Walsh and Marianne, but this was not the end of his mutilation. Costa used his blade to remove each of Susan's breasts, cut out the victim's heart, as well as her genitals. What the fuck is wrong with this dude? Holy shit, that is some gruesome mutilation. How does someone do that? Fuck. All I kept thinking about when I read the details of these horrific murders is that there is no way the victims' families did not find out what happened to them, right? Like, you would want to know what happened to them. But to find out this is what happened to them, I cannot fucking imagine. The one solace, if there is any, in this type of disgusting act of sheer brutality, is that Susan was gone before any of the extra carnage happened. According to the book, Costa had proceeded to dismember the body after the mutilation and decided to try and fit all of the pieces of Susan into a duffel bag. However, it wouldn't hold it all. Costa then put Susan's decapitated head into a bag and placed the rest of her pieces into a blanket, did some drugs, and set out to take the victim's remains to his car. The kicker? It turns out that Costa got pulled over for the sounds of his muffler, and it is now believed that he had the body of Susan inside of the trunk as the officer wrote him a ticket. Not long after the disappearance of Susan, Costa would be arrested and charged, but not for murder. No, rather for driving without a license and for not paying child support. Just a few months later, he would be released back onto the streets to do as he pleased. Within a few weeks of his release, Costa would meet a young lady named Christine Gallant. As he was sitting at a local establishment, the woman strolled in, upset and rough-looking. This is when Christine met Costa as she explained that her boyfriend had laid hands on her once again. Costa thought Christine was beautiful, and the pair started chatting and connecting. And it was then that Costa learned that his new love interest needed to head back to New York by the end of the week and asked if he wanted to go with her. After finishing up some work that week, he took the bus to meet Christine in New York City, where the two had fun spending time together, talking and seeing shows. One evening, as the pair were in Christine's apartment, drinking some wine, Christine had finished her glass when suddenly she seemed to feel fuzzy and dizzy, followed by blacking out. Christine would be found dead in her bathtub by an apparent drowning by her roommate Cynthia. It was declared that Christine had drowned in her bathtub after an apparent overdose of barbiturates on November 23, 1968. However, according to the Helltown book, it was alleged Costa had dropped drugs into his girlfriend's wine glass and possibly had been responsible for her overdose and death. Just 2 months later, Costa would meet Pat Walsh and Marianne Wysocki, who had been visiting P-Town for a weekend getaway before they disappeared. After Costa had dismembered the two women and buried their remains, he then buried the weapons that he had used to kill his victims, rather than stashing them again for future use. maybe now the knife and gun had enough victims' blood on them to consider retiring them. Costa then removed the clothing that he had worn and buried them along with other evidence and headed back to his boarding house. After the weekend getaway was supposed to come to an end, neither Pat nor Marianne had been back in Rhode Island in their normal everyday life routine. Pat hadn't shown up for work as a teacher, and no one had seen Marianne either, with both sets of parents knowing something was wrong, as the two girls had been friends for a very long time and now neither had been seen or heard from. They immediately contacted the authorities about their missing daughters, and an investigation into their disappearances was launched. Detective Bernie Flynn and State Trooper Tom Gunnery were interviewed about the case, saying that they had interviewed local people in the area about possible sightings of Pat and Marianne. Witnesses said they had last seen the young women in the company of Costa in the light blue VW Bug headed towards Truro. When the authorities showed up to Patricia Morton's boarding home to interview the landlady and inquire about the women, she would explain that she had found a note on their door the day after she had seen them last, explaining that they were checking out, thanking her, and their belongings were now gone. As word was getting out about the missing women, a sighting of the girls' car was called in a nearby old cemetery in Truro, a place one town over from Provincetown. The car was seen deep in the woods surrounding the cemetery, as a resident who had lived near the area had seen the abandoned car and called it in as suspicious. When the authorities showed up to search the vehicle, they found it empty, with nothing pointing to what could have happened, and to top it off, the car hadn't been reported stolen. The women were just gone. After the initial contact with the car then vanished from the woods. Witnesses had seen Costa driving the car, and a local resident would come forward stating that Costa had showed up asking how much they would charge to have the car painted. When Costa was questioned about how he came to be seen in the car and what he knew about the disappearances of Pat and Marianne, he would describe how the girls had left the car with him, claiming that one of them had been pregnant and was in search of getting an abortion in Canada. And after staying at the boarding house, they had then taken off, headed north. After Costa was already being looked at as suspicious, he would then contact the authorities with a telegram that his mother had allegedly received from Pat and Marianne in Canada, asking if Costa was all right because he had not shown up to meet them as scheduled, although they did wait for him. The telegram then noted that they would meet up with him again as the group had discussed. Costa had made a mistake creating this telegram, trying to take the focus off of himself, although he was indeed the main suspect in the woman's disappearance. What he didn't realize was that the authorities would be able to trace the telegram back to its origins, and it turned out that it was Tony Costa himself that had sent the telegram to his mother from P-Town and signed it from the girls, which of course only made him look more suspicious. Costa had also changed the story from the girls leaving the car with him to head to Canada to the fact that he actually bought the car from them, and that's why he had it now. With the red flags and evidence stacking up against Costa and the disappearance of both Pat and Marianne, the authorities wanted to search the boarding room that Costa was staying in, although he had taken off. Investigators found a long piece of rope in the closet of the room with what appeared to be blood on it. Costa was now out of town, but quickly learned that he was being looked out for the murders, so he came back to town to try and clear his name quickly. Now he was under constant surveillance. It was time for the authorities to search around the area the car had been found. In a group of authority departments, including park rangers, police, state police, canines, and even a plane, they quickly discovered something odd. As the police were conducting this huge search for anything suspicious or off in the woods, one of the investigators found a large tree in a spot that he claimed looked like a good area for maybe a blanket or something for a picnic, as they already knew that this was the area that Costa liked to bring women. He then found a depression on the woodland floor about 10 feet from the road that wasn't completely covered over, and this is where Tom Gunnery started to dig, where he quickly found a green duffel bag. Underneath the duffel bag, they started to come across dismembered body parts in 8 pieces. What they hadn't realized at first was that this didn't belong to any of the recent missing girls, Pat, Marianne, or even Sydney. No, this body belonged to Susan Perry, the 19-year-old who had gone missing for about 5 months. At the base of one particular tree in the area, as the search continued, Tom Gunnery found a piece of rope similar to the one found in Costa's boarding room closet, which indicated to the state trooper he needed to dig. he started finding drug paraphernalia, and when digging a little deeper, his hand came into contact with a decomposing body part. Detective Flynn then helped his colleague dig the area where they would come across a plastic bag, and inside was a decomposing human head. After clearing dirt and debris from the head the best they could, one of them recognized that the head that they were holding in their hands belonged to Marianne Wysocki. Unfortunately, despite digging this grave, they realized that Marianne's whole body wasn't here, and they knew the rest of the pieces were buried around the area somewhere. They continued their efforts to find the missing pieces of bodies as they uncovered yet another grave with a putrid smell that the authorities claimed you never forgot. They had stumbled upon more body pieces of Marianne, but also the remains of Patricia Walsh, as her body had been severed at the waist. They would find yet another dismembered body, this one belonging to Sydney Monson, buried in the same graves and holes as the other women. These monstrous acts of violence and murder with dismemberment not only shocked the small town, but the country as well. Every piece of evidence they had pointed directly towards Tony Costa, and he was arrested on March 6, 1969 for the murders. As the pieces of women were being found and analyzed the best they could, the authorities would find bite marks on some of the dismembered pieces, pointing to just absolute rage or frenzied behavior. The district attorney at the time would describe in an interview that after the girls were cleaned and laid out for medical analysis, he would remember that you could see the look of horror or quote-unquote screams still on their faces, and remarked that it's something you never forget. On the episode of Crime Close-Up, a forensic psychologist, Dr. Catherine Ramsland, would discuss that burying a body after a murder is usually faster and cleaner, but to actually dismember a human being takes a lot of time, strength, and effort to complete this, and that this act had to be a huge part of owning his victims. After the remains were looked over with medical experts, it would be found that not only had Costa removed or changed around some of the internal organs, but that he had also skinned some of the body parts, which is something that he may have had much practice with in his taxidermy hobby. Costa was then charged with multiple counts of murder, and due to the nature of his crimes, he would be evaluated at Bridgewater State Hospital to ensure that he would be fit for trial. He was deemed mentally fit for the trial, although during the trial, according to court documents, 2 psychiatrists argued that Costa was borderline schizophrenic, who was further diminished in his mental capabilities by all of the drugs he did. However, 2 more psychiatrists argued that he simply had a personality disorder and no mental issues. It would come out in either his memoirs or from prison or his confessions or whatever that Costa had what he alleged to be a voice in his head, another personality in there, or like an alter ego telling him what to do with these heinous acts, and that the name he used was Corey, although in some sources I saw Carl. It was widely speculated that this was Costa's attempt to distance himself from the crimes that he had committed and to maybe mitigate the gruesomeness of what he had done. I mean, I'm sure it's easier to say, hey, it wasn't me. It was this awful guy inside of me telling me what to do, right? It was Corey. In the book that I have referred to, the author does a fantastic job incorporating the possibility of what those internal conversations could have been if they are believed to be true. Interesting, at least. After the trial, in which the jury, along with other members of the court, were taken to the location of the murders or dismemberments to see the crime scenes for themselves, despite the fact that Tony Costa tried to claim the insanity plea for his crimes, he would be found guilty of the grisly murders of Pat Walsh and Marianne Wysocki and sentenced to life in prison. During his time in prison, this is when Costa would write his novel that went unpublished called Resurrection, where he finally described the murders he committed in detail, but claimed that it was all his alter ego who committed the disturbing acts. On May 12, 1974, Tony Costa was found hanging from his cell, where he had used a leather belt to commit suicide at the age of 29. And that, my friends, is the story of Anton Tony Charles Costa, serial killer, mutilator, butcher, and necrophiliac. This fucking guy, am I right? Holy shit. Like, the depravity of the dismemberment just blows my mind. This may be morbid, but I was left thinking like it's one thing for someone to commit murder and then panic and want to get rid of the body and they need to dismember the body to remove it, right? Because a body is probably extremely heavy and they're just trying to get away from their crime. I'm not saying that's okay or anything. And personally, the thought of taking someone's arm or leg off makes me squeamish. And I've cleaned dead bodies before when I was a CNA, like after they would pass, you would clean them up. Sometimes they would lose their bowels or whatever. You want to clean them up so they can be taken away to the funeral home. But to imagine taking apart a dead body, holy shit. Anyways, it's one thing to think of someone doing that in an effort to get away with their crime or something, but that was not the case with this guy. Like, he could have easily buried the bodies and then walked away, but he didn't. He would kill them on purpose, and then he would rape them, knowing they were dead, and then wanted to dismember them and mutilate them and take away their organs or move them around or whatever. Like, what the fuck is that? That is some scary ass psycho fucking shit. Am I right? Oh my God, it's just so horrific. I can't even. I'm just so sorry for these women's families that had to sit there and hear these awful things about their daughters or sisters or nieces or granddaughters or whatever. The lives that this sick fuck ruined. And when they interviewed the investigator and police on this case, even decades later, you could tell that this case still affected them. I was sitting there thinking, like, can you imagine digging and finding a body part or a head? I always think that it's not going to bother me that much to see stuff during my true crime cases that I research, but once I saw a picture of a severed head that was found on the ground, and just the picture made my stomach churn and feel uneasy. The people who investigate crime scenes, the police, the damn photographers on these cases, like, they do that for a living. How does that not stick with them or fuck them up, right? Or maybe it does. I don't know. But man, they are some serious heroes because without them, we couldn't solve horrible cases like this. I just have so much respect for anyone involved in shit like this. And there are so many of them. They have to have started in curiosity like the rest of us, right? How does one become someone who studies serial killers or gets paid to investigate disturbing crime scenes? They must have iron stomachs. Good on them because they are the real deal. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this fucked up case as much as I did, and remember that not all psychotic, mutilating, disturbed fuckers look the part. They may be just the quieter, charming, handsome stranger who wants to smoke a little pot with you. Just say no. Come on back next Monday when we will cover another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.
Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to today's episode here on The Kill File. Check out the website at TheKillFile.com to suggest a case or find the merch shop. Follow us on social media for weekly reminders about episodes, to share your thoughts, or to find bonus pictures from the cases. Remember to lock your doors, lock your windows, and stay safe. See you next Monday for another story here on The Kill File.